Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you could join in on this conversation that I want to have with Jeremy. I'm going to let Jeremy introduce himself and tell you who he is and what he does and kind of why I even wanted to have this conversation. I think will make sense in a minute. So Jeremy, go ahead and introduce yourself and get started.
Most of you probably know me. I'm Jeremy Pierce, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor. And obviously during this time, there's a lot of stress going on, whether it's in couples, families, with kids, and we're also away from our church family, which is also a good support for us.
We've got a lot of ground that I want to cover, and we may wind up doing this in installments, and we might have some subsequent weeks that we get together and kind of have some conversations. But let's just kind of start with what I want to term as shared trauma, like what we're experiencing right now as a nation, as a people, as a family, as a church. It's kind of odd because rarely do we all experience the same kind of trauma at once.
Yeah.
And so if you could kind of set the stage for what are we feeling? What are the repercussions for being on lockdown and sheltering in place and social distancing? All these things that even 8 weeks ago would have been completely foreign to us. It sounds kind of like we're living in a science fiction movie. And so emotionally, what's going on psychologically?
Yeah. So, and they've done actually lots of different research studies about this and the effect of quarantines and stuff like that on different populations. And essentially what they find out is what you experience during this time is almost exactly like post-traumatic stress disorder. So you're going to have intense emotionality, you're going to have nightmares, you're going to have difficulty in interpersonal relationships, heightened stress, depression, anxiety, things like that. And the difficulty is that we're facing right now, and this is why you see a lot of people talking about first responders and stuff like that, is that typically you have a group of people experiencing something or somebody that experiences something, and then the first responders come in, and they're not a part of that system.
Yeah.
But now the first responders are also dealing.
Yes.
So they're traumatized, trying to help people who are traumatized.
Right. So it's interesting. There's no distance there, whereas you would normally kind of seek out a healthcare professional, a psychological help, even spiritual help from somebody who can kind of be that non-anxious presence in the room that can have some distance. But we're all in this together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that makes it a little more difficult in that you think about, kids, for example, and some of them may be kind of oblivious, some of them may be just enjoying time, some of them may be anxious about what's going on with school and stuff like that. And so you think, well, as parents, typically in that situation, if it just affected the kids, you'd be able to be there for them.
Right.
But now all of a sudden you're experiencing that same stress in a different way, in an adult way, but you're experiencing the same trauma they are. And it makes it really hard to connect and support each other.
Let's talk a bit about what some of those symptoms might look like. I know from my own experience that anxiety in itself is kind of an overarching, there's a lot of things underneath that not everybody processes the same way. So if you're experiencing, what do they call it? General anxiety disorder, you might have night sweats and panic attacks, or you might have a racing heartbeat, or you may have only one of those, or you may have all 10. So, not to get too WebMD on you, but what?
Let's send everybody to WebMD now. All of a sudden, like,
what does this look like for people who are at home for extended period of time, and how might this be kind of boiling up to the surface?
Yeah, so there's probably 2 or 3 directions that most people are going to experience. The first one that usually comes along with this, and this, I want to be careful because this doesn't like mirror the stages of grief, because the stages aren't stages in that type of way.
Right.
But we're going to have a lot of anger and frustration.
Frustration.
And so, that is going to typically come out how you typically feel anger. So if you're an outwardly angry person and frustrating, now you can't go to the gym, you don't have all these regular coping skills.
Right.
So how is that going to come out? It's going to come out in, maybe yelling at your wife, or it's going to come out in you internalizing it, and then we have on the other side of the spectrum depression.
And so you may retreat back into some bad patterns.
Absolutely. This is where I was actually talking to a supervisee of mine about the need for so we're supposed to be social distancing, right?
Right.
What does that mean to people who are in recovery? Can you go to a meeting? Right? So now all of a sudden these social systems that are put in place to help people are now kind of ripped out from underneath them in the moment they need them the most.
Right. I heard somebody say they were trying to figure out how to do a recovery group on Zoom or over on, and they said the problem with that is as soon as you show up on Zoom, you are no longer anonymous. People know who you logged in as. And so whereas you would have had that outlet.
Also, you can't smell each other on Zoom to know if somebody.
That's true. I think this is the greatest one. I shouldn't say the greatest. This is one of the things that we're trying to figure out as people of faith, because the meeting, the weekly coming together, the physically being present with people is so important. And we're doing our best to try to provide that experience online, but it's not. And we can't, so we can't say, oh, well, I watched the sermon and it was same as coming and hugging and being with people. So, all right, let's back up for a minute.
Okay.
I said to somebody today, the problem with this is you're waking up with yourself every day. Who you are in isolation is who you were when you were going to work, when you were going to school. But now you're having to face yourself. You're having to deal with your demons.
Well, I would push on that just a little bit and say that I think now what we're having to do is we're having to wake up and face our shadow selves.
Come on.
Because, you think of going to work, you think of, just the normal routines of life. It actually allows us to escape a little bit.
Right.
And not face some of those things. And so we're actually facing ourselves, but we're also having to face the pieces of ourselves that we really don't like, that sometimes we've been running from. And now they just all catch up with us at once.
Let's talk about good practices, bad practices. Okay. So there's a lot of people out there that are feeling some pressure, and I'm thinking mostly moms of elementary students, because that's how I'm processing all this. But you're feeling like, okay, we're not in school, and now I need to be the best educator. Even if I never studied education, even if I never wanted to educate these kids, this is why we believe in the public school system or send our kids to great private schools. So there's this pressure to kind of redeem this time. And you can kind of see people, it's funny, we're reacting in the way you would think Americans would react. Like, okay, we've got these 30 days.
Let's bootstrap this thing and,
We're gonna do a weight loss program for 30 days, and I'm gonna come out of this thing ripped.
The Horatio Alger myth, right? We're gonna, come from the bottom and resurrect this thing.
And so where do you find a balance in that where you say, I can do this much, this is kind of a healthy, setting some healthy boundaries for yourself, maybe? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I would say that really begins, and hopefully Amanda's not watching this, because I'm going to contradict some things. This really begins in your own family values. Right? And finding what's really important. So we talk about redemption. What do we mean by that whenever we're talking about family and redeeming this time? Right? Is it best, if we're going to redeem the time, for a mom or dad to be stressed out in the morning, yelling at their kids to get on the computer, to log in, to do X, Y, and Z? The kids are crying, everyone's frustrated. Is that really redemption?
Right.
Let's look at what's really important here. Absolutely, you're stuck together, right? I'm not saying school is unimportant. It absolutely is. Let's look at the things that are more important than that.
Right.
You can't repair a broken relationship between a father and a son that's broken during this time. Abuse that happens during this time. You can't repair that.
Right.
So let's take a step back, take some of that pressure off. You don't have to be some great teacher from New York that created some amazing curriculum that now everybody loves. you can just be you and take that pressure off and say, look, get off of Pinterest, get off of Facebook, where everyone's showing all these great homeschool ideas and, oh, well, we did this and we're redeeming this time this way, and say, look, let's take a deep breath and say, how do we want to spend this time?
Yeah, I want to talk just a minute, and because I want to continue this idea about practices. And there's a parallel here between the practices that we might engage in now and the ones that we've always said we never had time for.
Yeah.
And I really do not want to be real Pollyanna about this and say, oh, this season, this time is a gift from God. But in some ways, the world has pressed the pause button. And we've said, you've got 30 days, if we looked at it from today, you've got 30 days to do things that you've never had the time to do, that work has taken you away from, that school has not allowed you to interact with your kids with. And it reminds me of the spiritual practice of solitude. Monks.
It'd be surprising you think of solitude now that you're quarantined with your family.
Right. Well, you go, yeah.
I'll give you my card later.
It's a type of solitude with other people, which is how extroverts choose to practice solitude. Right?
With other people.
With other people. But this idea of monks going off into the desert, of kind of living this monastic life, this time of quiet for a period, and the practice of that really causes you to deal with you, with who you are.
Yeah.
And so there is this sense of now is a really good time to kind of look at who you are, where you're at as a family, where you're at as a Christian, priorities, I think, if anything.
Yeah.
So if we said some of the best things you could do for your own mental health, for your own spiritual health during this time would be what?
Okay, so I've been kind of keeping track of this, and every kind of frustrating, but every therapist that you can hit with a stick in this area is putting out some kind of 10 tips to help with, like, everybody's trying to profit from this time, right? Great, okay, they're redeeming it, but it's all the same stuff, right? It's all the stuff that we know all the time, which is more kind of self-care, self-maintenance type stuff, which is sleep well, get in a good routine. Try to stick with that. Doesn't have to be super precise. We're not talking military, but your body needs a rhythm.
Yeah.
Try to stick with that. Get outside. Again, they're saying, like, don't go to the park and play basketball, but take your dog for a walk. Do whatever you can do within reason.
We've kind of experienced this, and I imagine most folks have, this kind of resurgence of the family walk. Our house.
Oh my goodness.
Our house is backs up to our walking trail.
Yeah.
And we see neighbors we've never seen before, because normally they would be at ballet practice or soccer or dad's working 80 hours a week. And here are all these folks, and we wave at way more people than we ever have.
Yeah.
But even just that practice of getting out and moving, I'm not talking about we're going to embrace a new fitness plan.
No, this is not about fitness, weight loss. So we're just talking standard principles that we know. We understand how God created us and what we need.
What's the mind-body connection there? Because what you're saying is you need to sleep for a certain number of hours, not an over amount, but not.
Yeah.
You need to get your rest. Yeah. You're saying moving our bodies, getting out in the sun, kind of feeling those rhythms. Why is that? How does that connect with our minds and our anxiety?
Well, so going back to the earlier discussion about kind of experiencing this trauma together, right, is that it kind of puts our bodies in almost this perpetual fight or flight response. We're hyper aware. There's this hypervigilance of, was that a cough? That's right? Am I warm? I do it with Amanda.
I'm thinking about 6 feet right now.
I'm like,
and worried, are we fine?
Like all these things, there's this hypervigilance going on. And so our sympathetic nervous system is ignited, which then is releasing all the stress hormones and stuff like that, right? So we're feeling it in our body, even if we may not think that we're stressed.
So we're hitting the red button of the amygdala, going, death is in the air and in every sneeze.
Yes, this is that survival instinct,
right?
That's saying this is dangerous. We need to be aware and take care of things. However, what we also know is during quarantine, actually kind of the best thing to do is nothing, right? We need to like, stay separated and like not engage, right? So it's really difficult to push against that. But one of the ways that we actually turn on our parasympathetic nervous system, which is a system that's responsible for helping calm us down, is by staying in good routines and taking care of our brain. And so some of that is sleeping well. Some of that is not to lose weight, but exercising, right? Gives us some good endorphins. Getting outside, walking gives us some dopamine, serotonin, like all those different things, getting moving, eating well.
We're probably, I was thinking about this the other day, we're making 90% of our meals at home. Whereas, I don't want to get into percentages, but in a normal week, we might have gotten more of those through a drive-through or through sitting down at a place. And I can already tell the difference.
Absolutely.
So embracing some of those practices. I don't want to cut you off.
No.
Anything else there that you can kind of tap into?
Yeah, so I would say what all those lists are missing, and you can like Google how to deal with the coronavirus, and it'll come up with 17 million lists, CDC, from every therapist in the neighborhood. But one thing that I've seen missing from all the lists is kind of what we were talking about a few minutes ago. So say, let's use an example here. Say you fall in a ditch, you fall in a hole. Right? What's the first thing you need to do? It's a trick question, right? I didn't warn you about this one. Usually we begin to think, okay, well, how do we get out of it? Right? So absolutely, but there's something that happens really quickly that we don't always recognize, and that's acceptance. We have to accept that this is the state we're in.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
We can't, until we do that, we can't accurately engage it based on our beliefs and values.
How much damage is the 24-hour news cycle? Which I think this crisis is not built for that, because there's not enough new information coming out, and so they're kind of having to gin up stories where maybe they don't exist. This is a longer, it's taking longer for this to play out. There's not really helpful information. It's like some people knew this 2 weeks ago, that the best information we're going to get wasn't until 2 weeks from right now. This is now where we're kind of getting into the best information that we needed 2 weeks ago. But it's not even a 24-hour news cycle anymore. It is. I'm constantly looking for something new. How much of that is kind of feeding the beast?
Well, I would say probably 99% of it's feeding the beast. We only need actually a very small percentage of information for our body to process and our mind to say, okay, I can kind of make sense of this. And that's kind of, going back to, was it Dragnet or whatever, like just the facts, like let's just stick there, right? We don't need a lot. But then whenever we get inundated with all this stuff, what we actually do is get back in that cycle of hypervigilance, and because it's feeding that beast of saying things are dangerous, I need to be aware, I need to know what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. So we're actually feeding that beast in the trauma, as opposed to trying to feed something else that allows us.
I always like to ask the question, I do this with my preaching, or I try to, at the end of a sermon, I've given a lot of information. But if there's nothing then for people to go and do, and the problem with news, I'll do the air quotes, is there's not really, once we've gathered that information, there's not really a lot for us to do with it. So is there a limit? Do you say, I'm going to check every night at 9?
This is what I've been recommending to most of my clients is set a time, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening. That's kind of a good rhythm anyway, because we usually grab our phones first thing in the morning, flip through Facebook or whatever. But stick with pretty reputable things. CDC is a really good one. And they have an app. Bookmark their website, go there, limit, don't. And again, we may have to step away from even Facebook and say, because everyone's trying to drill up something. And we're also getting kind of this. We experience the trauma, but we're also getting vicarious trauma from other people sharing.
Well, you're borrowing anger, is what I always like to say. Is that news agencies need you to be angry about something, so they'll push up their clicks and their likes, and you're right. We're already hitting that center of our brain enough to where where mostly when I walk away from a news story, I'm just angry.
Yeah. Well, and the same, it's news, it's also other social media sites like, the Nextdoor app and stuff like that, because internet disinhibition is a real thing. You get behind that computer and you say things that you normally wouldn't say to someone.
Absolutely.
And so you get a lot of people that want to just kind of vent about stuff. And then either you want to come to defense or you want to say, yeah, right on. That's, again, just feeding the beast. Because whenever you walk out your back door, the grass is still green, the birds are still chirping, the lawn still needs to be mowed. Like, all those things that's still reality. And we have to come back in contact with that.
Let's talk a minute about kids. I think this would be especially helpful for a lot of the folks that are going to listen to this. We haven't had the sit down, kids, let dad tell you about coronavirus. They are picking up a lot. We've said a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
What do kids need to know? How much is too much? What's your advice on that?
So we use this principle. Hopefully this won't have to be edited out, but we use this principle whenever we're talking to kids about sex as well. Whenever they first have those talks, you want to start at like the 30,000 foot view,
right,
and go down. You don't want to answer questions they're not asking.
Right.
And so if they're asking questions, very general, hey, there's a lot of people sick out there, and we just need to be careful and try to keep each other well and healthy, and these are some things we can do, because again, kids are very concrete. Say, okay, well, wash your hand, like those basic things. You want to give them some sense that they can impact something, and so you give them those X, Y, and Z's.
So you're giving them things to do that are healthy habits.
Yep.
How else can they process? What's a good? Are we asking them to draw pictures? Are we asking them to write? Somebody had mentioned, I think this is great, that you ought to have your kids writing 2 or 3 sentences about their day, because historically, 50 years from now, when they're telling their grandkids about this, they can look back and go, oh yeah, this is what we did and this is what we had to do. Where a lot of that might be wiped from their memory with time.
Yeah.
So what are some good things maybe for kiddos to be doing? I think the routine is still there, but
yes.
Go ahead.
So that can be helpful. A gentle pushback on that is that also encourages us all to be very problem focused,
right?
And encourages the kids then to focus more on this is some kind of a big deal, because then their parents are pushing them to write about it. Right. So that makes it a bigger deal for them than even it really is. So absolutely, kids journal and stuff like that, but we want to be careful about too much pressure with that.
Yeah.
Because that'll actually make it worse. Because it's like, oh, well, this is a really big deal if they're X, Y, and Z.
They're taking their cues from us.
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, like they always do. I mean, if you drop the F-bomb at home, they're going to do it in kindergarten.
It's true.
They take cues from us. Sorry, Joe. I'm sure that's never happened to you. I would suggest this. Again, this goes back to your beliefs and values as a family, and say, okay, well, how do we want to address this together? Kids oftentimes, especially whenever you're looking at probably 8 and under, they process through play. Right? This is not, it doesn't have to be structured play. You don't have to sit out and do it, be a play therapist or anything like that. Get on the floor and play with your kids. Right?
Yeah.
That's how their frustration and anxiety and stuff, and you're going to see it in their play. You'll notice, oh, wow, I didn't know that, G.I. Joe's head came off like that. You're going to see that, but that's how they're processing, and that's how they're actually going to get through and walk through some of those difficult things. Once you start getting older, 9, 10, 11, play is important, but they also begin to verbalize more, and so you can process more that way and have discussions, play games together where you're able to have discussion, not about, hey, let's play Jenga and talk about the coronavirus. It's, hey, let's just play Jenga together, and we're just going to talk about, hey, let's do a check-in, highlight, low light. Let's do the whole sachet check-in, sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender.
I don't know about that. Just spell that out.
Yeah, so I got that actually from Jay Jarbo.
Okay.
He's a life coach, and so it's just a little acronym that kind of helps us to remember certain emotions to check in with. And so sachet, it's sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. And say, okay, what are 2 or 3 you're feeling, right? And it's just real easy. Okay, Tinder, anything about that you'd like to share? Yes, no, move on, right?
How about this idea of giving each other permission to not be excellent right now, to just kind of embrace this season of what, and that's what this is. This is going to be a season of time, and and I know it goes against some of our American tendencies, which is to push and excel. But to say, Mom, you've got permission to not do 8 hours of school.
Yeah.
You can do 2 hours of school and 2 hours of play and watch a movie and read a book and do things. And not only that, but I was just thinking about the idea of permission. I have a few people in my life that have permission to call me and to really ask, get right down to it. We don't have to have any pleasantries, but to say, how's your level of anxiety right now? I've got other friends that I call to say, how's your habit? And are you okay? Talk about that for a moment. What can we be doing to connect? Again, we're distanced.
Yeah.
We're asking to be distanced.
Yes.
And yet we don't want to be isolated.
Yeah. So there's a couple things there. One is, and this is where we kind of get into this conundrum in times like this, because absolutely, we need the social distancing, but we're also highly connected to physical touch. It's not good that man was alone. He can't find a suitable partner, right? And God knows, this is how we are wired to be in relationship and connection. That's represented in the Trinity. Let's make man in our own image, right? Yeah. We're wired to have connection. And during this time, don't go hugging random people in the park and stuff like that. I mean, that's going to get you in a hole.
I think that's assault.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several issues you're going to run into, but inside our families, don't forget to hold hands, to hug each other. I know we're in the same rooms together a lot.
Oh, that's good.
But sometimes we forget to actually touch each other.
Yeah.
You don't have to say anything.
Right.
There doesn't have to be anything behind it. Just touch.
It's Jesus healing the leper.
Yeah.
Could have done it in any way he wanted to.
Hold your kids, hold each other, family dog pile. It can be fun. It can be so don't forget the power of touch during this time, because we're not going to get it anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that helps us stay connected with each other as well. The permission thing is big, because that actually, not to get too theological, that pushes against some of our good COC theology, which is, God's grace is sufficient, but I've got to make sure and stay on track.
Right.
Because, guess what? We can fall from grace and blah, 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 and we're pushing against other belief systems. The reality is, we're all going to really mess up during this time.
Yeah.
And we're going to wake up and we're going to have bad days, and we're going to be depressed, and we're going to be anxious, we're going to be angry. We're going to say things that we don't mean. We're going to hurt people that we love. And giving, I think, absolutely giving space to other people to say, they're dealing with stuff. Let's give ourselves permission to forgive. Because a lot of times we want to hold that against someone else.
Sure.
For whatever reason. It's our sense of justice, of what's right and wrong. Let's forgive each other. Give ourselves permission to do that, to not hold things against each other.
That's brilliant. Let me put a kind of a close to this. I want to come back in another session. I don't know what you're charging me for this, but
you'll get my invoice.
I want to come back in another session and talk about lament and really kind of maybe dig a little bit deeper into grief. I think you and I both have a particular past in that, or maybe even a present in that. So I kind of want to maybe tell people this is not the only one of these that we'll do. But I do feel like we need to kind of land the plane a little bit. Any other tools? Any other? It could be a book. It could be a podcast. It could be, I loved the idea of the check-in. But any other tools that you might give here in closing, to say, hey, you might consider this. You might consider that.
So here's one thing. So a couple things there. One is, whatever profession you're in, stay connected with other professionals in that, because you're working from home, et cetera, you're disconnected maybe from your colleagues and stuff like that. But find a podcast that's kind of in that niche, maybe a little out to challenge you, but you kind of stay connected. Again, that helps us feel like there's normalcy, right? We really want that. And then I would also say, this sounds, this isn't a plug for Netflix or Hulu. Spend time together. And I know that sounds cliche, but we want to take this time, going back to the very beginning, so this is all going to wrap it up, and struggle to redeem it.
Yes.
We are not the Redeemer.
Right.
We do not redeem this. God is the great Redeemer. Our job is to be and receive. And that's where we need to focus during this time, is allowing God maybe to speak to us and be with our family.
Well, and I'd like to end by maybe letting some folks off the hook where we don't have to take up for God.
No.
We don't have to make a case for...
It's not the Odyssey. We don't have to defend him.
Why this wasn't his will, or we don't have to be the person that's always posting the uplifting scripture.
No. Yeah, I mean, guess what? I mean, God is aware of the fallen state of this place.
Right.
Okay? So he's not going to be offended
You're not
if we're
telling
like,
him
hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so, absolutely, some of it is being honest with ourselves in that as well, where we are in our faith walk, and talking about it with our family. I think if I were going to encourage families to do two things, I would say this. One, whether it's as a couple or as a family, use this time to really unpack what you believe and what your values are. Allow those then to guide your behaviors. Don't try to back into it and do things and then think, okay, well, was that redeeming our time or not?
Right.
Slow down, take the time, and let the beliefs and the values guide you. We all have them. We often don't actually verbalize what they are. So that's one. And that could be, both, religious and faith beliefs, but also just beliefs in how the world works, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing, and this is a shameless plug, most counselors are working online now. It's never been easier to access mental health.
Yes.
You can do it in your PJ bottoms.
Right.
Put something on top, okay?
Right.
But I mean, and insurances are reimbursing for that now too. It's a little bit different, but it's still, we've found it just to be research-wise just as effective as in-person therapy. Yeah,
the whole telehealth in general is blowing up, and that's really good to know. And we've this is a whole other session about
3 episodes.
The destigmatization of asking for mental health, especially in church circles, Christian circles, because that can really kind of has a bad name. Jeremy, I got to thank you for your time, for your insight.
Absolutely.
I really do want to come back and let's talk more about lament and maybe some processing through some spiritual disciplines. But thank you so much. I hope this has been a blessing to everybody who's watched, and God bless you.
Yeah, God bless.